Whenever your professor provides you with an example or a student model, it's a good idea to spend some time looking at it because generally speaking, it's going to give you an idea of what your professor is looking for. So for week three, we've already talked about the essay assignment for English 102, your poetry explication or your poetry analysis, which will be due in the following week. But there's also a student example here that you want to go ahead and take a look at. So if I open this up, I'm going to go ahead and scroll through. The first couple of pages are just going to give you a little bit of general information about how to write about poetry. But if you scroll through to about the third page here, we're going to get an example of a poetry analysis or a poetry explication. And I want to go ahead and encourage you to read the whole thing and to examine what the student is doing. But I want to point out some of the things that are happening in the introduction. So we'll begin just by reading the introduction together. The title of the essay is An Explication of Thomas Hardy's The Man He Killed. And the introduction reads as follows. Hardy's The Man He Killed deals with the senselessness of war. It does this through silent contrast between the needs of ordinary people, as represented by a young man, the speaker, who has killed an enemy soldier in battle, and the anti-human and unnatural deaths of war. Of major note in this contrast are the speaker's circumstances, his language, his sense of identity with the dead man, and his concerns and wishes. So here the writer is doing a couple of what I think are successful things in this introduction. First off, in the very first sentence, we're made aware of who the author is, what the title of the poem is, and the writer is making a comment or a statement about what the poem means as a whole. We sort of get a statement about not necessarily the theme, but at least the main topic of the poem. From there, the next sentence, which we might consider a bit of background information, the writer is identifying what technique the poet is using in order to make the points that the poet is making. So in this case, there is a focus on the idea of contrast. So contrast is a tool or a technique that's going to be used throughout the poem. The contrast is representing the difference between a young man's experience killing an enemy soldier and the unnatural death of war, right? So we're looking at those two things and contrasting one with the other. The final sentence here that's underlined would be considered the thesis of the essay. What the thesis is doing is not just telling us what the poem means, but it's also telling us how is the writer creating that meaning, or how is the poet creating that meaning. And specifically, since we're focusing on contrast as a tool, as a literary technique, what are the things that are being contrasted throughout the poem? Well, the student writer lists them in the thesis, right? One thing that's going to be contrasted are the speaker's circumstances. Another thing that's going to be contrasted is the language. A third thing that will be contrasted is his sense of identity compared to the person that he killed. And finally, what will be contrasted is his concerns, right? The things that he's worried about with his wishes. And so the student writer of this essay has identified contrast as a major tool that Thomas Hardy uses to create meaning in the poem, but then has gone a step further to tell us these are four elements or four places where I see Thomas Hardy using contrast, and these are the things I'm going to talk about in my essay, right? So we can, as you continue to read on your own, you'll notice that the first paragraph is going to talk about the speaker's circumstances, right? The contrast that exists there. The second body paragraph will talk about the contrast of his language. The third body paragraph will talk about the contrast of identity, and so on and so forth. So again, I'm just going to encourage you to really take a look at this student example and to use it as a model to imitate when you are working on your own papers.